Let's transition to the wide receiver position.
Yes, absolutely. Because this one is, we've talked about, I mean, if you're going to rank the position groups that we've talked about coaching-wise over the last year to 2 years, I think it goes offensive line and then wide receiver, as far as issues that we've had, with the coaching and the play and all of that. So we've got a new coach at wide receiver. It's Chansi Stuckey. He was just introduced yesterday as well.
Already on the road recruiting, which is fantastic. We feel like that's probably a good place for him recruiting wise. So what does he need to do walking into the door? Because this is a different situation than walking in the door at offensive line. This is walking in the door at wide receiver, where you've got 8 scholarship receivers, 2 of which are injured right now as well. Yeah, and look, he's got a big test in front of him, right?
Yes.
But I do think he has talent to work with. I think that's the thing. I was told by a couple sources actually that one of the things that the coaches that interviewed kind of observed when they watched the film of Notre Dame players was like, wow, these guys don't know how to play. Like, I was told that by multiple sources that know multiple of the guys that interviewed for the job.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a misconception on the talent level that this group has because they weren't taught how to play. I mean, you watch the national title game, I watched the Kansas City Buffalo game, and I'm watching Gabriel Davis, who went to UCF, just literally spinning guys into the ground. And I'm like, that's how you're supposed to play the game. Now,
exactly.
There's certain things you do as an NFL player you can't do as a college player. But Notre Dame is so far away from where you can be as a college team. And that's really where this begins with Chansi Stuckey. The number one thing he has to do the minute he arrives from a team standpoint is get back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many little things that they just don't do well. Getting in a stance, proper spacing, getting off the line versus press. Again, these are like day one install things for a receivers coach. Use attacking leverage.
I mean, it's advanced high school stuff, but
some of it is. Yeah, some of it is. A lot of it, the stuff I just said is. But like attacking leverage, being able to manipulate top ends. Those are things that shouldn't be considered next level stuff.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, those should be relatively basic things. Like when I remember watching, it was the 2019 game against USC. Chase Claypool runs a post route. He's got Isaac Taylor Stewart just flat beat, just because he's faster than him, and he just kind of drifts to the post. Well, Isaac Taylor Stewart is never threatened, and he just kind of runs with him, and the ball hangs up, and he's able to make it. Where just one little lean stick, and he's open, and it's a 50, 60-yard gain. Like, those little things are the difference against good opponents between an incompletion and a 50, 60-yard gain. That's what people don't understand about this. And what gets me so dang frustrated is you're so focused on scheme and you just do these same dumb drills every single day. It's like you're not teaching these kids how to play. And it was just across the board. I mean, the only guy that I felt was a really good technical player last 2 years is a former quarterback. Quarterbacks tend to be more focused on those type of things. And if you ask me, that's something he learned back home, not at Notre Dame, because what Avery Davis did was so different than what everybody else did.
Yeah.
And I'm going back 5 years, and so the technical improvement is the biggest task in front of Chansi Stuckey, and it's the basics. I mean,
you've got to it's like going to boot camp. You've got to erase almost everything that these guys have learned.
See, I'm going to disagree with that, Vince.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of deprogramming that has to happen because they weren't doing stuff.
Because they weren't doing anything to begin with.
It's not like, hey, you were doing top ends incorrectly. You just weren't doing top ends.
Yeah, right.
Right. And again, if you look at who's the player the last 2 years that had the most separation on vertical type routes, it was Avery Davis. I think of the Purdue route. I think of the Clemson route last year. And those were well executed top ends. We just never saw that with anybody else. And he was able to lean, stick, and all of a sudden he's beasting Clemson on a big play, a playoff team, right? We hardly ever saw that kind of stuff from the receivers. I mean, so you're not deprogramming anything. It's like they just you
need to teach them how to practice.
This matters
you need to teach
you.
them how to do all the little things. Yeah,
this
absolutely.
matters to you. Nothing's more important than this. If you don't do this, you can't play for me, right? If you don't take your stance and start seriously. If you don't
Right.
work hard to master your craft against press, because look, as more and more teams go man coverage, you're going to see more and more press. And the way that Notre Dame played the last couple of years, especially in 2021, because they didn't have like Javon McKinley and like Ben Skoranek was taught how to play receiver at Northwestern. Okay, not at Notre Dame.
No.
Javon McKinley was just kind of bigger. He could just out muscle guys. He kind of like had that Chase Claypool, Miles Boykin thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't really have that. Kevin Austin's not that kind of strong player. At least he doesn't know how to use it. And the other thing too is Javon learned a lot of that stuff in high school. And that stuff Javon was doing back at Centennial, which is why he was so dominant. Which is
what made him such a highly ranked recruit coming out. Yeah.
And so his thing was just finally staying healthy was his big thing, and staying out of some trouble.
Right.
So when I look at the receiver position, Vince, it's like, look, you've got to take this seriously. You have to be, in my opinion, no skill position in football in today's game requires more attention to detail and really respecting the craft more than receiver, in my opinion. And I'll give an example. It's not that those things aren't important in the secondary, but a friend of mine asked me this. We're talking about Cooper Kupp. And he's like, man, Cooper Kupp's really fast. I was like, no, he's not really. He ran a 4.6 something at the combine. He's not that fast.
Yeah.
Cooper Kupp plays fast.
Right.
Because he is a master.
Man.
Right. And you watch guys like him. I remember like when I grew up, I told you this, Vince, when I was a receivers coach, when I was coming up my first year as a receivers coach, I spent that whole offseason studying Curtis Johnson, who's now at the Saints, but he was coaching Santana Moss and Reggie Wayne, and I had a lot of practice of his practice film. And I'm watching these Santana Moss and Reggie Wayne run routes, and I'm thinking, these guys are flipping masters of route running. Like, yes, they're athletically gifted, but they are right. Reggie Wayne was not a 4.3 guy. Marvin Harrison was fast, but I mean, you look at these guys over their careers, like Jerry Rice was a master at how to play the position. He wasn't dominant off of 4.2 speed, things like that. And when you look at that position, you see the debate we were having about Cooper Kupp was you can do that. You can be a 4.6 skill player at receiver. If Cooper Kupp played defense, he's not an NFL player. Meaning, now again, I'm not saying transitioning to defense. I'm saying if an athlete like Cooper Kupp comes along and he plays defense, more often than not, he can't play because at the end of the day, technique's important, but you either can run or you can't on defense. At receiver, you can be more of a precision guy that maybe you can play beyond your skill set. Michael Thomas for the Saints is an example. He wasn't a real fast guy. DeAndre Hopkins ran a 4.6 something, right? But these guys are mastercraft people, man.
Right.
And that's what allows them to be successful. You don't have, look at Cooper Kupp. He gets, I was watching the game on Sunday. I don't watch a lot of NFL, but I watched this weekend's games, and the Saturday games.
There were some good games.
Like boring. Sunday's games were great. And I'm watching Cooper Kupp, and I'm like, I knew he was really good. I've seen the stats, and I've seen like workout tapes of his, but I'm asking myself, like, are they just not covering him? Like, how's he this wide open all the time? And then they show the play, and you're like, oh yeah, there you go. Look at that stem. Look how he leaned the guy. Look how, and I'm just like, man, this is
the master of his craft.
I'm just like getting tears in my eyes because I'm like being, remembering what it's like to watch guys that know how to run routes. and my point is, that's what I've been saying about Alabama for years and Ohio State for years, is not only are they great athletes, but those guys are also master craft people. And that's where Notre Dame needs to get to. Chris Olave is probably not going to go run a 4.3 at the combine, but he knows how to play. I doubt Garrett Wilson runs a 4.3 at the combine, but man, he knows how to play. They know how to get open. And that's been missing in Notre Dame. And nothing is more important than that. Teach these kids how to play. Now, beyond that, there's some other things like, one of the things that we had, Vince, was like, you got to be better pass catchers, right? You got to know how to fight for the ball. There's technical things involved. Remember last week we were talking about receiver play, and we talked about how
catch and roll.
Catch and roll. And you saw that in the playoff game this weekend.
Couple times. More than one. Way more than one.
Where a guy catches and he roll. You have to teach that.
Right.
Right? That's not something that just you do automatically. Maybe some guys do. You practice that.
Yeah, right.
And to me, there's things you do. So like I've talked about accelerating through the comeback, and I've talked about, there's drills that we would do in practice. And again, this is Division III and Division I AA guys, right? These aren't, a couple of my guys got NFL invites, but neither of them made teams. But like you practice when you're running a fade route against press coverage to jump straight up for the ball, right? You're never going to be able to run full speed and stop and jump straight up for the ball.
Gravity
right?
gets involved.
But you work on that and you practice that, because when they do jump and they drift, they're not drifting as bad, which means, because like the Virginia play with Braden Lindsey, perfect example. Braden jumps, but he jumped and he just kept going. Well, the DB never really hit him. The DB was just in front of the ball and, was able to break the ball up. If Braden worked every week, we would work on this. Like once or twice a week, we would work on this during warm-up, where you're teaching him to jump up, because what happens is he has if you jump up, then I have a better opportunity to reach beyond you, right? Which like Michael Mayer did in the Virginia game. The other part is if I'm able to jump more up, even though I'm going to have a little bit of a drift, but not as much of a drift, that guy is going to run through me when I go back for the ball. And if I'm making a play for the ball and he runs through me, if I don't make the catch, it's still PI.
Yeah.
But you'd see the Notre Dame players kind of drift real bad, and so it would never force the DB to run through them, and so they weren't able to draw the PIs.
Right.
Those are things you teach every single week. You work on them, and when they're out on their own in the summer, they work on it every day. In the season, you mix up. Like Tuesday, you have your drills. Wednesday, you have your drills. Thursday, you have your drills, right? Like you mix those things up. You can't do all of them every single day, but that's because the season is more about keeping those things refined, not adding them. You add them in the spring. You add them in the summer, right? And none of those things were taught. And those are all about competing for the football. When I watch Baylor's film, I'm going to have something here in the next week, as I continue working through the film, I'm going to have some stuff on the premium message board, some video clips and some breakdowns kind of going through what I see from the Baylor film. But they compete for the football so much better than the Notre Dame receivers.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing too, is I think it was like the receivers alone, according to Pro Football Focus, had about a little over a 50% completion rate on contested balls at Baylor. At Notre Dame, it was like 37, something like that. No one can tell me that anyone on Baylor's roster is better than Kevin Austin. And I guarantee you none of them run like Braden Lindsey. You know what I mean? Like the talent, it's not a talent problem. It's those kids know how to play the game. Notre Dame's kids don't. To me, at the end of the day, those are vitally important things.
No question.
Vitally important things.
No question.